Trucks carrying aid were seen moving from Egypt's Arish city to the Rafah border crossing with Gaza early Tuesday morning. This comes after US President Joe Biden and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi discussed the need to preserve stability in the Middle East during a phone call on Monday. Now, the White House said that Biden and Sisi also discussed ongoing efforts to alleviate the worsening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. Earlier, Egyptian Foreign Minister said that the Israeli government had yet to take a stance that allowed the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza to open. The Israel Defense Forces have said their airstrike has killed a senior leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. They have also released accompanying video footage of the attack. The IDF said the targeted airstrike killed Osama Mazini, the head of the Shura Council of Hamas. He was a key hostage negotiator for the militant group. According to the group's armed wing spokesman, Hamas has about 200 to 250 Israeli captives in Gaza. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has warned Hezbollah and Iran against intervening in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. His comments came during a meeting with the King of Jordan and shortly before his trip to Israel. Scholz reiterated Germany's absolute support of Israel, but called for intensive crisis diplomacy in view of the ongoing conflict. During the meeting, Jordan's king also warned against trying to push Palestinian refugees into Egypt or Jordan, stressing that a third of Jordan's population is already of Palestinian origin. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has now confirmed that President Joe Biden will pay a solidarity visit to Israel on Wednesday following the Hamas attacks. Biden's scheduled visit coincides with a deepening humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip and Israel's preparations for a potential ground assault against Hamas. This assault has been described by the American and Israeli forces in and beyond Washington and Tel Aviv as the most devastating attack on Jews since the Holocaust. President Biden's primary objective is to convey unequivocal support for Israel amid its ongoing state of war with Hamas. His Democratic administration has committed to supplying military aid, including deploying US carriers and delivering assistance to the region. Rockets were intercepted in the night sky by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system as people took shelter in Tel Aviv as sounds of explosion echoed throughout the city. The 11 days of strikes so far have failed to eliminate Hamas' capacity to fire rockets into Israel, where warning sirens sounded. Hamas had said that it fired a barrage of missiles on Jerusalem and Tel Aviv earlier on Monday. During an air raid alert, Netanyahu and US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who is visiting Israel for the second time in 5 days, briefly sheltered together in a bunker. The European Union has said that it would launch a humanitarian air bridge consisting of several flights to Egypt, aiming to bring supplies to humanitarian organizations on the ground in Gaza. The first 2 flights will take place this week, carrying humanitarian cargo from UNICEF, including shelter items, medicines, and hygiene kits. EU President Ursula von der Leyen has also announced that EU will triple its humanitarian assistance to over $79 million to support civilians in need in Gaza. Diplomatic efforts to arrange a ceasefire to let aid reach the besieged Gaza Strip failed earlier. Egypt had said that Israel was not cooperating with delivery of aid into Gaza and evacuations of foreign passport holders via the Rafah crossing. Hundreds of Israeli high-tech experts have temporarily put their private sector jobs aside to help locate Israelis missing after last week's attack by Hamas group. For the past 10 days, more than 450 private sector employees have volunteered to locate missing Israelis. So far, the civilians have been successful at tracking down more than hundreds of people, becoming a key source of information for the government. The government right now strongly relies on the information that is coming up from these rooms. The volunteers are able to track and identify victims but are working against the clock as hostages remain in Hamas custody. Forensic teams in Israel have examined bodies of victims of last week's Hamas attack on communities around the Gaza Strip and said that the process will take time. A member of the forensic team has said that they took DNA samples and fingerprints from the bodies of the victims and they will compare it to the army data that they already have. Now, around 1,300 bodies have been brought to an army base in Ramallah in central Israel, where forensic checks to determine the identity of the dead. The team has now said more than 500 unidentified bodies have been identified. However, the military personnel overseeing the identification process did not present any forensic evidence in the form of pictures or medical records. The UN Security Council has rejected a Russian resolution that condemned violence and terrorism against civilians, but made no mention of Hamas attack. Only 4 countries joined Russia in voting for the resolution. 4 countries voted against it, including the United States. 6 countries abstained, and Russia's UN ambassador had urged support for the resolution to respond to the unprecedented exacerbation of the situation, citing the Council's inaction since the 7th of October. The UN's most powerful body, which is charged with maintaining international peace and security, has not taken a position on the Hamas assault or on Israel's response with airstrikes. The Supreme Court of India has delivered the much-anticipated verdict on legalization of same-sex marriage in the country. The top court has refused to legalize queer marriages, saying that making such a law is the domain of the parliament. However, the court has acknowledged the concerns of the community and provided some relief. The Chief Justice of India said it would be incorrect to state that marriage is a static and unchanging institution and that it must be ensured that the queer community is not discriminated against. However, due to differences on certain views, the 5-judge bench failed to legalize the status. Brussels police shot dead a suspected gunman accused of shooting dead 2 Swedish football fans during Belgium's Euro 2024 qualifier. 12 hours after the attack, the prosecutors announced that suspected shooter has been neutralized after officials opened fire at him. While Brussels continues to be on its highest terror alert, Belgian Prime Minister slammed the harrowing attack and described the incident as a brutal terrorist attack by cowards. China is hosting representatives of 130 nations for a forum that marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. The forum that started on Monday to focus on Beijing's international infrastructure plan something that is considered to be an important part of Chinese President Xi Jinping's efforts to expand the nation's global reach. China aims to move from high-priced projects like dams to high-tech projects such as digital finance and e-commerce platforms. At the top of the list of invitees to China's Belt and Road Initiative Forum is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin arrived in China today ahead of his meetings with Xi Jinping. And this is his first trip to China since the Ukraine war. Hardline Republican Jim Jordan has started to pick up some support for his campaign to lead the US House of Representatives. Several of Jordan's Republican colleagues have said that they would support his bid for House Speaker. It was unclear whether he would be able to unite his party enough to prevail in a floor vote. Republicans hold a 221 to 212 House majority, meaning Jordan can only afford to lose 4 Republican votes to secure the 217 he would need to win if all Democrats oppose him. Jordan's supporters have encouraged voters to call lawmakers directly to wear down opponents. A week ahead of Argentina's general elections, opposition presidential candidates took to the streets to hold populist rallies. This, as the nation is heading to elections and the economy continues spiraling downwards. According to an Argentinian statistic agency, poverty in the nation has taken a big jump in the last 7 years. Just over 40% of the country's 46 million people live in poverty. These figures are a little more than 30% in the second half that we saw in 2016. Colombia's government has ordered a 3-month ceasefire with the former rebels of the country's largest group of dissident called Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, also known as FARC. The government has now called for formal peace talks with the organization in order to end a nearly 6-decade-old internal armed conflict. According to the authorities, the ceasefire will be in force starting today until January 15th next year. Delegates signed the agreement during an event in the Catatumbo region near the Venezuelan border, an area that has seen frequent clashes between Colombia's military and illegally armed groups. Two ships carrying rescued migrants arrived in Spain's Gran Canaria. As per official data, more than 8,500 migrants have arrived in Spain's Canary Islands over the past fortnight. The ships carrying 111 migrants in total arrived at Spain's port. Spain's Interior Ministry said that the authorities are now struggling to cope with a wave of migrant arrivals. Around 12,500 migrants had been prevented from making the journey so far this year. The number of arrivals by sea to the Canary Islands has increased 80% compared to the same time last year. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has said that the government and the country's political opposition will consider possible electoral guarantees very soon. Venezuela's government and opposition plan to resume long-suspended talks, and this comes as Washington had said that it would ease sanctions if Maduro commits to an internationally monitored election next year. The United States has said it will be willing to ease sanctions, such as removing some restrictions on Venezuela's banking sector in exchange for democratic concessions from Maduro. Government and opposition delegations are expected to sign an election-related agreement. The Amazon River fell to its lowest level in over a century at the heart of the Brazilian rainforest. This, as a record drought affects the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and damages the jungle ecosystem. The drought has left boats stranded, cutting off food and water supplies to remote villages. This, while high water temperatures are suspected of killing more than 100 endangered river dolphins. The port of Manaus, at the meeting of the Rio Negro and the Amazon River, recorded 13.59 meters of water on Monday, compared to 17.6 a year ago. Investors and traders are keeping a watchful eye on the US dollar, with investors closely monitoring developments in the Middle East and anticipating key central bank speeches. Among them, Federal Reserve Chairman Powell's upcoming address is expected to set the tone for future monetary policies. Concurrently, the Japanese yen remains under scrutiny, with traders keenly attuned to any hints of intervention by the Japanese government. Highlighting the Japanese yen's status as a safe haven on Japan's financial diplomat, one of Japan's financial diplomats emphasized its likeness to the Swiss franc. This recognition comes against the backdrop of West Asia conflict, where the US dollar is being sought as a sanctuary in turbulent times.